My name is Liz Murray, and I'm from New York City. I'm actually from the Bronx. And I guess people most typically know me from my memoir, which is Breaking Night, My Journey from Homeless to Harvard. I mean, when I was young, my idea of the American dream, it wasn't some overarching large thing. I wanted to get food stamps when I was a kid. I grew up in the Bronx. My parents were on drugs. They had partied a little too hard in the 70s, and I grew up in the aftermath of what happened when the party was over, and everyone lived on food stamps. And without a concept of what a job was, I thought the best you could do was get some food stamps. And I think your idea of the American dream gets entirely shaped by the environment that you're in. So how can you ever dream about something that you've never seen? I thought I could get my own apartment, food stamps, live off welfare, be in the Bronx, and that would be a good life. It's, of course, changed so much since then, especially since when people hear that I was homeless and that I graduated from Harvard and I've become this homeless to Harvard person, I find it to be like, those ink blot tests that you see, this psychologist will give you and hold up. What do you see in here? It's the most interesting experience of my life, because depending on what people believe, they'll say to me, oh, you're the example of why bootstrapping is a real thing, right? And the American dream, and you embody it. Other people will say, I bet you got where you went because services helped you, nonprofits, right? And thank goodness for those. Your story is the embodiment of that. So I think for quite some time, it took me a while to go through this homeless to Harvard experience and live the American dream before I could turn around and begin to ask myself, what do I believe? And now I really believe that, of course, this country is incredible and gives you a unique opportunity to mobilize yourself out of the class that you were born into. But I also think that's only half the American dream. I think another part of it is I have my ambition, I dream the dreams that I do, and then there has to be some social support to meet me on the other side of my dream. And those two things really complete it. So for me today, I don't know if I can nail it in a phrase, but my sense of my American dream in my heart is to be able to create some kind of a success for myself that generates a stable life where I can take care of a family. But then also, if I could add my own PS to the American dream, I don't believe it's success unless it creates opportunities for other people. So, one thing that seems sort of unfinished for me is that I've been encouraged in this country that is America to reach for my goals and dreams, and that should be the end of it. For me, now being able to have a home, no longer be homeless, to raise my son in New York City and not worry about food, I feel great for that. And now I have to live a life according to my own values that says, and now who else gets to go because I got this opportunity? To me, that's a whole picture of the American dream. Sure, yeah. There was a pivotal turning point in my life, because as much as I could talk forever about community and people coming together, there is really something to be said about taking personal responsibility. There is something to be said for that, as much as that is demonized. Again, I believe it's both. In my own life, I had nowhere to live, and I was looking for a high school, and my dad was in a homeless shelter. My mom had just died, complications related to HIV/AIDS, and I was 16, and I wanted to go back to school. I was about to turn 17, had never been to school. I started knocking on the doors of all these alternative high schools looking for someone who would take me at my age, and I got a lot of doors slammed in my face, and I almost gave up. There was this one afternoon I was standing in Midtown Manhattan, and I literally could have gone one way or the other. I go to the next interview and I try again, or I just give up, take the train for an hour, go back to the Bronx where I'm from, save the little bit of money that I begged for change to have, and I go buy a slice of pizza, forget the interview. And I remember being so frustrated at having so many doors slammed in my face, and I wasn't going to go. And I stood there, pizza or interview, and teetering between those two choices. I remember thinking at the time of my mother and how recently she had passed away and how much she loved me and how much I loved her. And there was something so grounding about that love. And the fact that I lost her woke me up to a type of urgency. And, I kept telling myself before she passed away that I would do everything later. I'll get a job later, I'll go to school later. Everything was later, like pressing the snooze button on my life. And there I stood on that corner trying to make this decision, and I told myself, oh, I'll go back to school later. And an alarm bell went off. And I realized that my mother had been homeless at my age, living in New York City. her mother had been mentally ill and sick and in unstable housing, and so on and so on. Somebody had to break the cycle. And if not now, then when? And I ditched the pizza. I went for the interview, and I told myself that even though it wasn't likely, at the very least it was possible that the school would take me. And when later on it came to applying to Harvard, I was a mess and coming from the streets, had never been to school, but I had 2 years of good grades. Should I apply to Harvard? It was unlikely, but I remember just feeling that love of thinking, well, it's possible. And being able to just live inside that possibility and push forward really began at that pivotal moment of the pizza or the interview. And now I find that really, as much as people like to try to tell you what they know is possible and not possible, no one knows what's possible until they're already doing it. You have to be in action to find out. Everything else is paralysis by analysis. So I believe when the rubber hits the road, that's how you know what's possible in your life. I think that children having to take responsibility for their families too young will dramatically impact people's dreams. Because there's a poem that I love. I think it's called Kitchenette Building by Gwendolyn Brooks, is it? And she writes about this time in Harlem when people used to live in a rent-a-room where there was one bathroom and on one floor for the whole building, and it was a mess. And she talks about the steamy, hot, messy building, and she talks about the how lofty, she says, is the word dream. This thing of dream that you say when number 2 is out of the restroom and the onions are frying on the stove and the garbage is ripe in the stairwell. We are the people of 9 to 5 living. We are the people of hard work, right? And this lofty idea of this word dream. And I think sometimes in the spirit of her poem, I think about these children having to grow up too soon when practicality comes rushing in and someone on television tells you to dream the impossible dream. And then the rent is due, and to master the practical pressures that will push in on you and still have the courage to put your head on the pillow at night and dream of your life being entirely different. I'll give them that it's possible, but in these economic times we are putting a lot of pressures and barriers between people and their dreams, undoubtedly. Company called Manifest Living and Manifest Training. So I do workshops for adults, and it's open for people to come in, and I do experiential training so that people can come in, and it's a 4-day training, and get this immersion experience in a series of exercises that focus on distinctions like trust, overcoming obstacles, what's in the way between you and what you want. And by the end of the workshop, I really look to give people what I consider like a tool bag, so that when they come out and they come into future situations and there's a barrier in their way, they can go, I remember this in the training, pull out a tool, use it, and support them in getting from where they are to where they want to be. When I think of someone else who's pursuing their American dream, I mean, maybe this is a bit, of course, self-reference, but I imagine in my mind that if you're trying to transform your life, things aren't always pleasant. And this is what I hear from the people I work with. Sometimes you have that really good day where it feels like anything is possible. And other days, who hasn't gone through the experience where you cannot pick yourself up off the couch and you're just grateful nobody can see what you look like with your hair a mess, it's not pretty, you don't want to go outside. And you start thinking that the dreams that you had in your heart and in your head were silly, right? And maybe you shouldn't have dreamed so big. If I could speak to people who are reaching for their own goals, I want to say in those moments where you might get discouraged, I know you've heard the words "don't give up" a million times, and this might be my own version of that, but from my heart to yours in all sincerity, it doesn't have to be that your journey goes from A to B to C to D. Some people go A, they go E, they go back to B, they go this way. Sometimes when you experience obstacles, I sincerely encourage you to consider the possibility that it does not mean that you are off course. It actually is just what it looks like to get where you're going. So if you wake up and if you have a dream and you're reaching for it and you took a couple of steps backwards, I will promise you that any successful person that you talk to who's ever been able to make it and accomplish their dream, they'll be able to relate to you and say, oh yeah, I failed 10 times. I didn't believe in myself. I wrote half that book and put it in my drawer and I didn't come back to it for 10 years. And when I did, I completed it. The road to your American dream is messy. And you know what? That's okay. It doesn't have to be pretty. But just remember that when you are suffering from those pitfalls, that's just what it looks like. That's just what it looks like to plow forward. So please, when you experience that, don't give up. You absolutely can accomplish your dreams. And when you do, may I also encourage you to turn around and ask yourself, okay, now that I got a chance, who gets to go? Everybody should get to go. And then reach back, and where do I get to contribute?